Are you worried about how much money it costs to start an OT private pay practice? Then stick around because I am going to break down the 8 most common expenses with starting your OT private pay practice. And I'm going to show you that there is a way of starting your practice that is much cheaper than you probably thought. Hi, I'm Doug Vestal, and I help OTs just like you start and grow thriving private pay practices. My wife and I, we founded our own successful OT private pay practice in New York City in 2014, and I make these videos to help you achieve success even quicker. All right, let's jump right into the startup expenses associated with starting your OT private pay practice. If you go to Google and you start typing in expenses with starting an OT private pay practice, then you are going to get a list of about 8 things. So the first is business registration and permits. Second would be rent. Third is going to be equipment. Fourth is insurance. Then we get to supplies. We have marketing expenses, staff that you may hire, and then finally the 8th expense would be accounting. And unfortunately, a lot of people just stop right there because they see this list and they start to get overwhelmed by it. But here's the thing, there is a big difference between a generic list on the internet and what you actually need to consider in practice. So let's break down these 8 common expenses to really put some actual dollar figures behind these, right? So you can see what actual cost you're looking at. And then the second thing is critically look at these categories because depending upon where you are and the way you start, you actually aren't going to incur all of these expenses at once. The way I recommend you start your OT private pay practice is on the side and invest in your practice as you start to see clients and as you start generating revenue, and so you can put that back into the business. I think this is the most straightforward way to sensibly start your practice with the least amount of risk. All right, the first expense is business registration and permits. Before you see your client in your business, you need to, make sure that you are legit from a business perspective. And that means forming an actual business entity. This could be an LLC or a PLLC. Now, there are online sites who would do this for you. And there are also lawyers who can do this for you. But you can also do this yourself in your state, right? You just have to follow the process that your state requires and pay the fees. And this is by far the cheapest option. The fees you pay will depend upon the state that you're in. And they range anywhere from $40 to $500. And the average state fee was $132 for 2023. Now, the downside for doing it yourself is it takes more time. And you have to be the type of detailed person who, follows out the procedures laid out by your state so you make sure you don't miss anything. The alternative is that you could use an online service, which is going to charge you a flat fee to do this, but probably have a few $100s in addition to that state fee. But you could totally do this yourself. So let's put that average price, the $132, in for the business entity expense. Now, the second big expense is, of course, rent. Now, I do not recommend that you go out and you sign a huge lease on a great office space. That, in my personal opinion, is a path to financial ruin. Instead, like I said in the beginning, I always recommend that you start on the side. Start seeing clients in the evening or the weekend while you keep your full-time job. Get your OT practice out there in your community and start building a caseload. Then drop down to 4 days a week and see clients 1 day a week. You do not need a huge space with all of the bells and whistles. If your type of OT practice is suited to seeing clients in their own home, then you could totally eliminate any expenses related to rent. And if that isn't feasible, then go and find an allied practitioner in your community that has space for you to rent. And you could rent a room from them and either pay each time you use it or strike a deal where you have it, let's say, a certain day of the week. You get that flexibility in terms of a lease, and it reduces your financial burden. I've had a ton of my students do this, and they pay anywhere from $200 to $350 a month for renting one room a week. But the good news is that rent is one of those expenses that you can set it up only as you start having clients, right? So what I would recommend is, if you're being really cost conscious, is start getting yourself out there. Start building connections. Start marketing your practice and build up interest. And then only start renting a room one day a week once you have paying clients coming in the door. This way your rent is offset by the clients you're seeing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 0 in this category, because you can absolutely see clients in their home to start or build up an interest list before you see your client in an office. Now, the third expense you'll hear talked about is equipment, but I am going to put this expense at 0. And the reason for this is because you aren't building this big office environment from the very beginning. When you get started and you are seeing your first 10 clients, you do not need a huge amount of equipment. In fact, you probably have all of the props and equipment already to start seeing those 10 clients. It is so easy to overcomplicate things, but I would stress here that what your practice looks like, 5 years from now is going to be very different than what you need 5 days into your practice. And with a little bit of creative thinking and planning, you can keep this expense in the very beginning to the bare minimum. So you really have to ask yourself if you absolutely 100% need it and if it will really make a difference. So let me give you an example from our private pay practice in New York City. We did house calls. So we would see new moms in their environment. Now, it would have been very easy to convince ourselves that we needed to bring a table with us so that we had a dedicated space where the mom could lay if we had to do any hands-on work. But that would have been a couple of $100, and we'd have to lug it around on the subway as well. So we dispensed with that idea of bringing our own table, and we turned it into something very OT. We used their natural surroundings to do our work. So think creatively in this category and give yourself permission to grow into it as your client caseload grows. You do not absolutely need everything at once. Now, the fourth common expense is insurance. And this is absolutely vital before you see your first client in your business. It doesn't cost that much to obtain insurance. We paid about $200 a year for ours, and there are a ton of providers out there specializing in the type of insurance you need. So really shop around and don't skip this important step. The fifth common expense is supplies. This is everything from towels to paper and pen. But remember, you don't have to have something that is completely stocked from the very beginning. You are growing as your client visits increase. So really, the bulk of this is incurred as you operate your practice, not as an upfront cost. I would not put more than $100 in this category in the beginning. Now, the sixth common expense is marketing. And marketing is incredibly important because it is through your marketing that you generate the interest in your practice, right? So that your clients can find you. This is definitely not a category that you can delay. So what I want you to do is I want you to invest in this category. And notice I didn't say expense. Your marketing is an investment in your OT practice because you literally get that money back in terms of potential clients calling you and booking. Now, at the same time, you can be smart with how you spend your marketing dollars, right? There are two really important pieces of marketing that you can create right away. The first is a rack card, and the second is a trifold brochure. Now, the rack card is a little like a business card, but it's expanded in that you have more space to talk about your services in your OT practice and use language that appeals to your ideal client. Now, the trifold brochure educates your ideal client on a problem that you can help them solve. So really think about what your ideal client is struggling with and think about what content you can create that helps them with this problem where they're at. This could be, tips, tricks, exercises, mindfulness exercises, resources they should consider, a checklist to help them identify, really like you name it. And you turn this into an educational based trifold brochure. And you can design all of this yourself in Canva and then spend $300 on an online printing service like Vistaprint to have them professionally printed and then delivered to you. This way, when you start meeting with potential referral sources or you give those community workshops, you have two concrete, tangible, and helpful things that you can leave with your potential clients. Now, the seventh most common expense category is staffing. But we are going to put a big fat zero next to this because we aren't going to hire right away, right? When you are starting on the side and seeing clients, you don't need extra staff. There is no need to go out and hire someone when you should be focusing all your efforts on attracting clients and providing amazing care to them. Let your caseload build and your waiting list grow before you ever hire. Now, the eighth and last common expense is accounting services. Now, unless you enjoy handling your own taxes and reading up with the latest requirements, then hiring a CPA is definitely worth the cost. They can be instrumental in reviewing the financials of your OT practice and making sure you're really getting the most out of your practice and the deductions. In the beginning, you won't need a lot from them, but as you grow, you'll want to lean on them more and more. Now, the cost for CPAs has a wide spectrum. That's why I recommend that you ask for recommendations from other small business owners in your area. And then I would reach out to a couple of them and interview them yourself, right? Explain your situation. You're just getting started. And in that first year, you won't have complicated returns to file, right? You likely won't have employees you need to pay. You will probably be one of their simplest and easiest clients. And then ask them what they will charge you to handle you in that first year of business. Now, I would expect to pay anywhere from $300 to $700, but consider it money well spent. And remember, this is money that is coming out of seeing clients. This isn't a huge fixed startup expense. This is incurred essentially after you start and are building your caseload, seeing clients, and generating revenue. Your particular circumstance will differ, of course, right? For instance, those state filing fees depends on your actual state. Also, you may decide that you don't want to do it DIY, and so you pay someone to help you. Or you decide to invest upfront in renting a room one day a week or buying some of that initial equipment. So this is really kind of the floor or the bare minimum on the startup costs. Some people do end up spending a lot more than this. Sometimes if you ask someone how much it costs, right, it's a little bit like asking the question, how long is a piece of string? But what I found is that people in general overspend when they go about starting their practice. They are really excited about it. They feel this pressure to be perceived as very legitimate. And so the expenses have a way of getting out of hand. So what I would encourage you to do is set a budget for these items. Get crystal clear on each category, the money you are willing to spend. And ask yourself a couple of critical questions along the way. So number one, is this something that I have to incur right now, or is there an alternative? Could I delay this expense by 6 months or a year? Or can I, set a plan where I will only purchase this piece of equipment after I've generated, say, $5,000 in revenue? Second, ask yourself if this expense is really something that's going to bring in new clients. Put it through that filter to make sure you are being incredibly intentional about spending the money. Setting up an OT practice is very different than other businesses. So let's think about a dental office, right? that dentist has to rent a building, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on dental equipment, hire a front desk, hire dentist hygienists, all before the dentist ever sees their first patient. But with OT, you have this amazing opportunity to really just start seeing clients without all of that initial upfront cost. Your business model is totally different than a lot of other industries, which is to your benefit. So embrace that, mentality and philosophy when starting your practice. And with that, you're going to be able to keep your expenses down. Now, one of the things that we talked about was marketing. And I want to make sure that you have a plan in place to meet with potential referral sources. So I recommend that you take a look at this video right here that covers the 5 best practices for establishing a good relationship with your referral sources.